What is the Shemitah? The Shemitah. Yo, listen. I'm going to talk to you today about a special topic. A topic of discussion that is chosen to be erased from all topics of discussions throughout all the topics of discussions. The holy, the forbidden, the sacred. The Shemitah. We will embark on an adventure today about the Shemitah. We will learn who the Shemitah is. What is it? Where does it come from? What does it mean for us and crypto? Today, my friend, I will teach you things that you've never seen before. I will show you things that you've never heard before. Did I say that right? Anywho, your job is to shut up and listen, because knowledge is a privilege, not a choice. In today's video, I will show you how I ran into the Shemitah, how my life has changed since Shemitah vision. See, in order to see the Shemitah, you must have Shemitah vision. And today, my friends, I will teach you, I will show you how to obtain Shemitah vision. And we will start from these 7 crashes that have happened and expand outward, okay? And you can learn about the Shemitah and the story and where it comes from and all that, okay? And if you guys want, I can read more excerpts from the book written by Jonathan Cahn. I suggest you get a copy yourself and read it as well. So without further ado, I'm going to get into the reading, and you guys do what you want. This is not financial information, but I will say these things right now. Look out for the date. Elul 29 is a date on the Hebrew calendar. If you translate that to the date today, well, in 2022, we can see that it would say it's Sunday, Elul 29, 5782, which is the last day of the Shemitah, would be September 25th, 2022. Remember that date right there. Mark your calendar. There's going to be a lot of events leading up to that date, and I'm expecting a big "Shorty wanna be your rug." Nah, I'm expecting something cataclysmic and biblical to reign upon the earth. Well, let's just get to the fucking reading. So, what I'm about to read to you is the mystery of the 7 crashes. There has been 7 crashes that have happened every 7 years apart. And the Shemitah happens to be a 7-year cycle. Could it be that the Shemitah has something to do with the cycle and the patterns of these economic disasters and financial crises? Is there a pattern here? Is there a relationship? Is there a script here? Who's writing this shit? I don't know, but let's take a gander and have a read. The great crashes. What happens if we search for the greatest long-term crashes as opposed to day crashes or collapses in the stock market history? These will generally be connected to economic crisis and recession. What happens if we take the Bible's ancient mystery of economic cessation and financial nullification and hold it up against these greatest collapses? And he's talking about the Shemitah. Let's see what they got to say. The following represent the majority of the greatest long-term stock market crashes in history, arranged in order of increasing magnitude. The crash of 2000-2001, the dot-com crash, and 9/11. This stock market collapse began with the dot-com crash of 2000-2001. Then came 9/11, which would first paralyze Wall Street and then cause further deterioration. The collapse would continue into 2002. By the time it ended, more than 37% of the stock market had been wiped out. Could there be any connection between the crash of 2000 and 2001 and the ancient mystery? The Shemitah comes once every 7 years. It just so happens that the first Shemitah of the new millennium fell in the period of 2000-2001, the years of the dot-com crash, a deepening recession, the attack of 9/11, and one of the greatest stock market day crashes in history. The Shemitah year took place entirely within the overall financial and economic collapse. Its overlap with the crash of 2000-2001 is thus 100%. What does that mean? So here, the First World War, the crash of 1916-1917. Also known as the crisis of 1916-1917, this stock market crash took place during the First World War. It began in November 1916 and reached its low point 1 year later in December 1917. Okay, what the crash of 1916-1917 lacked in length, it made up in severity. By its end, 40% of the market had been wiped out. Could there be any connection between the crash of 1916-1917 and the mystery of the Shemitah? There was one Shemitah in the midst of the First World War. It happened to fall in the years 1916-1917. 2 months after its beginning, the stock market collapsed. The Shemitah reached its culmination in September 1917 on the Day of Remission. 3 months later, the collapse was finished. The Shemitah coincided with the economic collapse for 10 of its 12 months, an overlap of over 80%. So you can see 2 cases, 2 big financial collapses happening in the same year and cycle of the Shemitah, the 7th year. The 7-year cycle, right? That brings nullification, cessation, and end to accounts. The crash of 1973. The crash of multiple crises. It began as a currency crisis and was compounded by the 1973 oil crisis and various other national and international crises. By its end, 45% of the market had been wiped out. In the 2 years from 1972 to 1974, the American economy's real gross domestic product, the GDP growth, shrank from 7% to a negative 2% contraction. At the same time, inflation soared from a rate of 3% in 1972 to 12% in 1974. The repercussions of the crash in the United Kingdom were even more dramatic, with the London Stock Exchange losing 74% of its value and only returning to the same market levels in 1987. Measured in real terms, it would take the United States 20 years to regain the levels lost in this collapse. Could there be any connection between the crash of 1973 and the ancient mystery? The Shemitah began in the latter part of 1972, with most of its course occurring in 1973. 4 months after the Shemitah's beginning, the stock market began to collapse. One of the Shemitah's definitions and consequences is that it causes the nation's production to decrease. The GDP represents the nation's domestic product or production. As the 1972 to 1973 Shemitah progressed, the nation's domestic production began to fall. By the end of the collapse, it had shrunk by 70%. The Shemitah took place simultaneously with the collapse in the financial realm for 8 of its 12 months. An overlap of over 66%. If you're on the side of the Shemitah and you're shorting something, this is what I mean by Shemitah vision. The crash of 1901 and 1903. Got a phone call. Booty call. Scam likely. Call. Never mind. The crash of 1901, 1903. The struggle of titans. The crash of 1901, 1903 was brought on by the struggles of E. H. Harriman, Jacob Schiff, and J. P. Morgan to gain financial control of Northern Pacific Railroad. It caused so much damage that the resulting crisis is sometimes called the 1901-1903 Depression. By its end, 46% of the market was wiped out. In the midst and depths of the collapse is the biblical year of the Shemitah. The Shemitah strikes again, which began in September 1902 and ended in September 21, 1903, the same year of the crash. Less than 2 months after its end, the collapse reached its end. The Shemitah's entire course took place within the collapse, an overlap of 100%. Sheesh. The following 3 crashes constitute the greatest long-term stock market collapses in modern history. Here we go. The recession of the Great Depression. They're saying that the Great Depression is probably going to happen in a Shemitah year. The crash of 1937 through 1938. The recession of the Great Depression. The crash of 1937 through 1938 was called the recession of the Great Depression. By early 1937, the American economy had recovered to pre-depression levels in the areas of production, wages, and profit. But in the spring of 1937, the economy entered a downturn. It continued through much of 1938. It brought the American stock market and economy back to depths not seen since the days of the Great Depression. Is there any connection between the crash of 1937, 1938, and the ancient mystery of the Shemitah? The years 1937 and 1938 just happen to be the same period of time in which falls the Shemitah. The start of the economic downturn came in March 1937 in the Shemitah's approach. The Shemitah's actual commencement day was September 6, 1937. The very day after the Shemitah began, Wall Street collapsed. Starting with this collapse and continuing over the next 9 months, America's manufacturing employment fell by a quarter, its industrial output by a third, the stock market by half, and profits by over 3/4. By June of 1937, 4 million workers lost their jobs. The stock market's downturn overlapped with the first half of the Shemitah year. Its deep crash began the day after the Shemitah's beginning. The Shemitah overlapped with the financial collapse for 6 months, or 50% of its duration, and with the economic collapse for 9 months of its duration, or 75%. The extreme economic plunge took place entirely within the Shemitah's parameters, within that year, is what they're trying to say, because the Shemitah, these things can happen the day the Shemitah starts, in the middle of the Shemitah, and end with a bang on the last date, the Elul 29, the date of nullification of a nation that has steered its belief away from God. Wow, listen, I'm so deep in Shemitah, I don't even know. I got Shemitah vision. Everywhere I look, it's just Shemitah. Shemitah. The crash of 2007 and 2008. Okay, we're in little modern times here. I like this. The crash, the Great Recession. We were all a part of this, right? The crash of 2007, 2008 is known as the Great Recession, the global financial crisis, and the Second Great Depression. It was the worst financial crisis since the Great Depression. It wiped away trillions of American dollars, threatened the collapse of several major financial institutions, helped trigger the European sovereign debt crisis, and launched a global recession that would last into 2009. By its end, more than half of the stock market had been wiped out. Is there any connection with the collapse of 2007 and 2008 and the ancient mystery? The stock market had been in a continual period of expansion for several years, but less than 30 days from the Shemitah's commencement in September 2007, the momentum began to change. The stock market began to collapse. So a month after the Shemitah started that year is when the stock market began to shift in a bearish movement. The Shemitah reached its climax 1 year later in September of 2008, which is the ending month of the Shemitah. Oh man. The Shemitah reached its climax 1 year later in September of 2008. The crash reached its greatest intensity the same month. Its repercussions continued into the spring of the following year. The ancient economic remission and the crash of the Great Recession took place simultaneously. The overlap of the Shemitah to the Great Recession is 100%. Golly. And that's kind of what we're going through this year. So we're in the month of September, guys. I'm going to say this again. Mark your calendars. Not financial advice. Remember, don't listen to me. This is all financial entertainment. We're just having fun here. You know what I mean? Shout out to the Shemitah. Shemitah vision. Yabish. 100%, guys. We just read that together. Let's get into another one. The crash of 1930, 1932. The Great Depression. Whew! The long-term collapse, which began in 1930 and lasted until 1932, would constitute the worst economic and financial crisis in modern history. The core of the Great Depression, even after the great stock market crashes of 1929, there had been an upward turn. In fact, within 6 months of the initial crashes, the stock market had returned to early 1929 levels, but in 1930, another downturn began, this time involving a collapse of global trade. Even with this, the market eventually stabilized, but in April of 1931, a downturn began that would bring the world into the depths of the Great Depression. By the end, in July 1932, the amount wiped out of the market was 86%. It would take until 1954 for the market to recover its pre-crash levels. The years 1930 and 1931 were marked by several key events and developments that would usher in the depths of the Great Depression. In 1930, there would be another stock market collapse, as well as the passing of the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act in mid-June, which would lead to a collapse in global trade and a further descent of the stock market. By the late 1930s, the world economy began a deep and steady deterioration. And yet the year 1931 would prove to be even more pivotal. It has been called the year that made the Great Depression great. In April 1931, a much longer and steadier crash began that brought Wall Street to its lowest levels of the century. The year 1931 was also when a deflationary spiral began, bringing the American and world economies into paralysis. Could there be any connection between the Great Depression and the ancient mystery? Were it not for what happened during the years 1930 and 1931, the initial recovery could have continued, thus averting the Great Depression. But it was then that the Shemitah came. The Shemitah took place in 1930, 1931. More specifically, the Shemitah began in late 1930, the same time the world economy began its steady deterioration. In April 1931, the center of the Shemitah year, the stock market began a long-term crash that would bring Wall Street to its lowest levels of the 20th century and to the depths of the Great Depression. The seventh year reached its climax with the approach of Tishri, the month that manifests the Shemitah's financial repercussions. On September 19, 1931, an event of seismic proportions took place in the financial world. The British Empire made the decision to discard the gold standard upon which its currency rested. The decision resulted in a worldwide panic that triggered the largest monthly percentage drop in stock market history and plunged the nation and the world into the lowest depths of the Great Depression. When did this global financial cataclysm happen? It took place on the 14th day of Tishri, the once in 7-year Tishri, the month of the Shemitah's financial repercussions, its climactic autumn wake. The ancient Shemitah and the Great Depression proceeded simultaneously. The Shemitah fell entirely within and at the core of the Great Depression. Thus, the overlap of the Shemitah to the Great Depression is 100%. Now you got to look into the Tishri. The Tishri is the most potent last month of the Shemitah, I believe. If you want me to read into the Tishri, man, smash the like button. We'll read that and get into that really soon. We have now looked at the majority of the greatest long-term collapses in stock market history and found an amazing thing. The majority happen according to the timing of the ancient Shemitah, and the connection is not minimal. Rather, the average overlap of the Shemitah to the collapse of the stock market is 85%, which is incredible. That's an incredible winning rate. What if you were betting with the Shemitah? If we alter the parameters to include the greatest long-term collapses from the time of the Great Depression onward, the results are just as striking. Of these, over 70% of them happen according to the timing of the Shemitah. Of the top 5 of these crashes, 80% of them take place according to the timing of the Shemitah. As for the top 2 greatest crashes, it becomes 100%. We have opened up the first mystery, a mystery of 2 realities. The greatest stock market collapses of modern times and an ancient ordinance from Scripture. The 2 realities would appear worlds apart. How could they possibly be joined in any way? And yet they are bound together strangely and inexplicably. Now we will look at the cycles of modern financial world, the greatest heights and turning points, and the cycles of the ancient mystery. Woo! Guys, what we're about to expand on next is unbelievable. Guys, we're living in biblical times in a parallel universe, mimicking, just going parallel with the biblical story. It's insane to me. And who the hell is writing this shit? Who knows? Who gives a damn? All I know is Alul 29 is coming soon. September 25th. Mark your calendars. Hope you know how to go short. If not, don't worry. Gonna make a video about how to make an account on GetBit, BuyBit, whatever it's called. And you can learn how to go short and leverage, but be careful, don't leverage too high. Leverage low. Because if it's your first time, well, you can get in trouble. Okay? So, anywho, man, this stuff is amazing, guys. If you like what you're hearing and you want to know more, smash the like. I'll get into the next chapter. And we'll get into it, man. This stuff is amazing. And I've been following the course of the Shemitah. Banana Fana Fafita. But listen, guys, check it out. You know what? In my next video, we're going to read about the 10 greatest single-day point crashes in the stock market history, bro. Now, we're going to pin these down to an exact date, and the results are going to fucking blow your mind. The Shemitah and world history. The judgment that fell on the land of Israel in 586 BC was a pivotal event in biblical history, Jewish history, and world history. In it, the Temple of Jerusalem would be destroyed, and the words of the Hebrew prophets fulfilled. The diaspora, the scattering of the Jewish people throughout the world, would begin, and the stage set for the formation of what would be known as Judaism and the coming of a Jewish rabbi named Yeshua, or Jesus, whose life was irrevocably changed the history of the world. And behind it all was the mystery of the Shemitah. In other words, this obscure little known ancient mystery has already affected the entire planet and those who live on it in ways too vast to measure. But could there be more to it? Could the mystery of the Shemitah still be at work, moving, impacting, and altering the course of world history, even in the modern world, even in our day? If so, what form would it take on? How would the Shemitah manifest in the modern world? The Shemitah's economic connection. In modern economies, a very small percentage of the people work the land, gather and harvest, and tend vineyards. So how could the Shemitah break the barrier to operate in the modern world? What happens if we look at the effects and consequences of the Shemitah in purely technical and general terms? The result is not only relevant, but also surprisingly applicable to our day. The effect and repercussions of the Shemitah extend into the nation's financial realm, economic realm, and the realms of labor, employment, production, consumption, and trade. Though most modern economies are not centered on agriculture, but are industrial or post-industrial, all of these attributes still apply. Thus, if the Shemitah was to manifest in modern times, it would affect the nation's financial realm, its economic realm, and its realms of labor, employment, production, consumption, and trade. Economic collapse. Over the course of the Shemitah, the nation's production is severely decreased. For a modern nation to witness a severe decreasing of its production would point to an economic downturn or recession, an economic collapse or depression. During such time, demand dries up, corporations downsize, factories cut back in output, and businesses close their doors. During the Shemitah, the nation's labor is greatly reduced. In the case of a modern nation, this would translate to massive unemployment. All of these, again, are characteristics of an economic recession or depression. During the Shemitah, the buying and selling of land's produce are restricted, and the fruits of labor are abandoned. Here, we have yet another characteristic of economic recessions and collapses. Demand dries up, consumption plunges, commerce dwindles. Consumers cut back on their spending, merchandise sits untouched in stores and warehouses, and international trade suffers massive declines. The fruits and products of the nation's industry and services are abandoned. Financial collapse. On its climactic day, Elul 29th, the last day of the Shemitah cycle, the force of the Shemitah causes credit to be canceled and debt to be wiped away. The nation's financial accounts are transformed, nullified, and wiped clean. The description again points us to an economic implosion, and more specifically to a financial collapse. Such collapses produce corporate failures, bank failures, foreclosures, and bankruptcies. Debt and credit are nullified. And in financial crises involving stock market crashes, financial accounts are transformed, nullified, and wiped clean. Billions of dollars are wiped away in a matter of hours or minutes. The effects and consequences of the Shemitah consistently points in the direction of a specific event, an economic and financial collapse. This resemblance of the Shemitah to the economic implosion has been noted even by the rabbis.